Welcome to the 24th episode of the HiFi Five. I'm Ron Resnick. Please like this video, and if you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. My guests tonight are recurring panelists Danny Kaey of EMM Labs and Sonic Flare. I'm delighted to see Danny back for this episode. Doug Schneider, founder of SoundStage, the world's largest group of audio and music websites. Peter Noerbaek, founder of PBN Audio, which makes dynamic driver loudspeakers, horn loudspeakers, electronics, and reconditions vintage turntables. And Mike Lavigne, one of the best-known audiophile hobbyists in North America. Tonight, we truly are back to the HiFi Five. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hello. Good evening.
It's been a while.
Oh, hello.
How's everybody tonight?
It's been a blinking minute, Ron.
Question number one. Before an audiophile buys his or her first serious component, how can a person figure out what sound subjectively he or she likes and wants from the stereo? How does somebody deal with that threshold question? What sound am I looking for? Doug.
Oh, hitting me first. What sounds natural? 100% is, and I always tell people that even the most novice listener knows what a voice sounds like. Find a good vocal recording. I could name a few, Tracy Chapman, that famous album, and buy what sounds natural, not what. So what sound is what's real, what's realistic, and go from there. That to me is there's no sound other than the sound you're trying to reproduce, and reproduce it as authentically as possible.
Danny.
You know, I picked up this trick, and honest to goodness, I cannot remember whom I learned this from. But what I always tell novices to do is, walk around your room and speak in a normal voice as you normally would, and listen to what your voice sounds like, and then have a friend do it, your partner, your wife, husband, whatever, and do the same thing, and listen to how the sound changes as you move within the room, starting in a corner, going into the middle of the room, back into a corner, to the side, to the left, and really closing your eyes and learning to perceive soundstage and dimensionality, resonance, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Oscar. Pete.
Well, go listen to some live music and hear what that sounds like. And then how close can you get to that with the system you're putting together would be my first recommendations. Actually, very few people nowadays go and listen to live music, and they should, because that's what we are trying to recreate. So that would be my first recommendation. Go listen to live music, hear what it really sounds like, and then you will kind of know you have a reference. Because if you only ever listen to music on earbuds or an iPhone or whatever, you have no reference of what real music can sound like.
Mike.
Just really everything the other guys have said, and then plus, I think just be conscious of training your ears and auditioning, and get your own music that you love, and take it with you whenever you're auditioning, and then the simplest thing is just to listen for clarity to begin with. What's distinctly clear to you, and I mean, that's just a starting point, and that's all. And then you just go from there.
I feel like a lot of people who are beginning in the hobby go into a high-end audio dealer and don't know what sound they want. And they hear what they hear at the high-end audio dealer and think, oh, this must be what it's supposed to sound like. So, okay, this must be what I'm supposed to like. And they buy a modern system, and maybe they wind up loving it forever, but maybe over time they say, I don't know if this is really my cup of tea. So my suggestion is, before you buy a big system, listen to lots of different types of systems. And by lots of different types, I don't mean CH on Magico versus D'Agostino and Wilson. I mean different types, like listen to horn speaker, listen to big box speakers, listen to small box speakers, listen to some dipole planers, listen to tubes, listen to solid state, and really try to get a sense of what you personally like. That's my suggestion.
I think to add to that, Ron, I think one other important element to that is that you can even take it a step further, because realistically speaking, by the time your speakers, whichever ones you may have heard, wherever you may have heard them in whichever environment, chances are they're probably not going to sound anything like that in your own four walls, right? Even if it's exactly the same speaker, exactly the same model, ultimately the ultimate arbiter of sound in your own four walls is going to be the interaction of the speaker with your room. And so, to add to that, again, I would just encourage people to really try to listen to as many different systems in as many different homes and or environments as you possibly can.
Let's say somebody knows in theory the sound he or she wants. How does somebody connect that subjective sonic preference to particular components? How does somebody know which components are going to satisfy the sonic preference they believe they have? Pete?
You don't. It's all about system integration, how the system integrates with the room, how the components integrate with each other. And you can have a certain speaker, you can put one amplifier on it, it sounds fantastic. You can put another amplifier on it and it doesn't sound that great. And so you should listen to somebody that knows what they are doing. That's like, get a mentor on how you put together a system. It should not necessarily be a dealer, because there's always, when you deal with a dealer, there's always the bias that the dealer has. Well, I make this work together. But like, go to your friends, listen to their systems, and say, hey, this works really well together. That's kind of the only way you can do it.
Mike?
Yep.
Well, I think we can all hear, but we have to learn how to listen, and it does take practice. You find a system where you're connecting a little bit, and then you just have to listen to a lot of music, and then over time you start identifying, as you listen to more systems, the sound with this piece of equipment or this sound with this piece of equipment. But it's just a lot of listening, and over time you develop, you hear more into the music with practice, and depends on your how you came to become an audiophile and what sparked you to do that, and just follow your intuition into it. I think that's the way I look at it.
Danny, how does somebody connect up a believed preference to particular components?
Gosh, I mean, I think that's almost, for a beginner, that's almost like a completely overloaded question, right? I think that for a novice or someone who's just now getting into this and trying to figure things out, look, at the end of the day, listening is an experience, right? It's an emotional experience for all of us, one way or the other, no matter what music you listen to. And I think to ask a person that's just getting started to kind of figure out, hey, should I listen to the shit amp? Should I listen to the tube amp? Should I listen to, a solid state amp, a VFET amp, a MOSFET amp? I've seen a couple of the comments. That's complete overload for people, right? So I think it comes down to, look, you got to learn how to walk before you can run. I love Peter's comment, actually. Find yourself a mentor. I mean, that's really how I got started too, right? Get a mentor who really knows his stuff, who's been around the block a couple of times. And even if you may not agree with him, it doesn't matter. It's just, a perspective of someone who can guide you and offer you suggestions. Because I can guarantee you none of that stuff is going to matter once you have it in your own house, because it's going to sound totally different.
Doug, what do you advise people?
I go along with what Peter was saying there about a system approach. I don't look at it as individual components. And in fact, one thing I wanted to say last time, because it kept coming up, the sound of an amplifier. An amplifier doesn't make any sound. What makes a sound is a speaker. And what you are hearing is the combination of the amplifier driving the speaker. That's what you're hearing. The sound is coming out of the speaker. And it's not true that all amplifiers sound the same, in the sense of they don't make a sound, but they interact perhaps with the speaker differently. Likewise, less so a preamp and an amp interaction, less so. And then up in your source components, let's say you have a turntable how that turntable cartridge tone arm behaves with the phono stage it's driving. It's an interaction as a system. So this idea that many audiophiles, many reviewers have, oh, I heard the sound of this amp, I heard this, that's not true at all. What you heard is the component operating as part of a system. And particularly, this is why I always believe that the amplifier and the speaker should be thought of as one. And I'm not talking about wireless speakers, but it makes a good case for active speakers, because how the amplifier drives the loudspeaker realizes the potential of the loudspeaker. And you get a tube amp that I've never found any tube amp in existence that can realize the potential of many, many loudspeakers, for example. And so you get different interactions and different results. So it's more a system approach.
Question number 3, should a beginner start with speakers and build the system around the speakers? Or might a beginner start with an amplifier and find an appropriately matched amplifier? Or do you think a beginner should start with the source? Danny.
Nah, it's always me. I think so. I first of all, I like what Doug said. Again, my only comment to that is, if you look at it, the speaker and the amp approach being together, that sort of, in my mind, presumes that you've already advanced to the stage where you can make those judgment calls, right? I think for someone truly getting started and finding his way into this hobby is to focus on a pair of speakers. It's generally speaking, for most people, I think it's the biggest purchase they will make as far as physicality, whether it's even if it's a bookshelf speaker or a stand mount or something, or obviously a floor standing speaker. It's generally going to be the most expensive thing that they're going to spend money on, whatever that amount may be. And it's the one thing that's really ultimately the final arbiter of what your system is going to sound like in your room, in your own 4 walls, because the speakers are going to couple to the room, and that's what's going to produce the sound. And, in the interest of, obviously saving yourself money, time, effort, etc., again, audition as many speakers as you possibly can. See if, the dealer will, I think any reputable dealer in this day and age will not shy away from, loaning you a pair of speakers to try out in your own 4 walls, and start with that.
Mike, what do you advise a beginner to start with?
Well, I think it's variable based upon your budget. At the entry level these days, with the digital being so good at the entry level and so reasonably priced, and I don't want to give an arbitrary dollar amount, but at the beginning, I think 90% of your budget could be speakers, and you might be able to run it with your phone even. I mean, I know that's overkill, but so at the lowest level, really the speaker is going to be 90% of what you're hearing. Okay. And so the sources are very cheap. As you go up in dollars, then you're going to start moving part of your budget more into sources or a preamp, maybe do an integrated. So, and then as you go farther up, then it's an open, you can't really make rules. So, but at the beginning, you're better off getting a $8,000 speaker investment and a $2,000 digital, because it's very good, very cheap. So, and the speaker room interaction is going to be almost all of what you're hearing. That's really where, and then as you go up, you add more for amplifiers, and that starts to make a difference. So that's what I recommend. A lot of people ask me, and that's what I tell them.
Doug.
I'm going to go back to the amplifier speaker. And I will say that, and part of that is what Danny said, how then the speaker couples with the room is the other part of that equation. So I would say you want to settle on the speakers you want the amplifier to drive it correctly. Okay, and then you get room placement and stuff. So I would look at the speakers, amplifiers. However, exactly what Mike said, inexpensive digital is very, very easy to get, and also very high performing. However, if somebody wants a vinyl based system, now the rules are different, right? Because a $200 DAC can get you by. A $200 turntable cannot. It's going to sound like crap. Okay. And that great pair of speakers is going to sound lousy. Analog does not get good till well past $1,000. Okay. And I warn people, you
Agreed.
better, if you really want to hear that record sound decent, pay way more than $1,000 for a turntable. Otherwise, you're way better off staying with digital. You can get great $200, $300, $400, $500 DACs. You can't get a great $500 turntable. So it kind of at the front end, it depends what the person wants. But again, the speaker amplifier together, how it fits in the room is another thing. But I would start there. But the turntable, if you want to go that route, is a big consideration.
Peter.
I would say start with speakers in what room you're going to put them. That's going to be the most important thing. If you are going to put it in a 8 by 10 bedroom, obviously you don't want big floor standing speakers. Then I would concentrate on source. If you're only going to go digital, that's been said by all the other panelists, you can buy a very good DAC for $300. If you want to go vinyl, then it's a different ball game, as was said earlier also. I will not agree with that you cannot buy a good turntable for $500, because you can actually buy a good used vintage direct drive Japanese turntable on eBay for $500 and then put a good cartridge on it.
I'm talking new. Yeah, new.
And there you can actually for $500 get something that is spectacularly good.
Question number 4. If somebody has a fixed budget, which almost everybody does, where should the largest share of that budget go? It sounds like we all agree the largest share should go to the loudspeakers. Is that correct?
I agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Question 5. What do you think is the biggest mistake people make when purchasing the first set of system components? Mike.
Overspend on pretty boxes, electronics. And not put enough thought into speakers in the room. So, but we're talking pretty entry. So if you move up a notch, then the next mistake is not recognizing, what do you want to build your system around? Because maybe you can't get to the level you want to be with every component, but what's the keeper? And understanding why that would be the keeper in your system, and then you're going to raise the other things around it as you go along. So system building, and hopefully you maybe you get a mentor or you learn a little bit and you kind of have a plan. Although sometimes as you listen and your taste change, the plan changes. But at least you want to try to be linear and not and the other mistake is if you buy something that's not sellable, you're kind of stuck. Then it sets you back in your process. So it's just having some logic in your plan, and so that's my 2 cents.
Peter, you manufacture entire systems basically. What do you see sometimes as first timers making a mistake?
The mistake I see most times, and where you can see people have been talked into a bunch of pretty boxes, and then 6 months later you see the system put up for sale used, and it sits in a room, and you can see they have spent mega dollars. I sell fairly expensive systems, and you can see the customer has spent a lot of money on the system, and it sits in a room that's completely not suitable for it. And then they have lost interest, and then they want to off it. So buying a system from somebody that do not have your musical interests or your listening interests in mind, but only want to sell you boxes, that is the biggest mistake I've seen people make, where they have lost a lot of money.
Danny.
Pretty much all of the above. I think I would even go so far as saying that honestly, look at the used market first, right? Before committing to a megabuck system and spending gobs of money on brand names and marketing. I call it the the wife shoe syndrome or handbag syndrome, right? She walks into Beverly Hills Rodeo Drive, and there's Louis Vuitton, there's Hermes, there's whatever, there's a Gucci, there's this, there's that, and brand names. Look, brand names are important in the sense that they give you stability, they give you an affirmation that your investment is going to be somewhat protected in the sense of service and support. I don't know of a single audiophile who ever bought a piece of gear and then sold it for more than they bought it for. The used market, I think, is a great place to start. And again, biggest mistake, spending too much money too quickly.
I have a very funny story about that. This goes back probably close to 20 years, and we sold a speaker system to a local guy in Southern California, one of our large systems. And I tried to sell him amplifiers too, but he was like, "No, I'm not quite sure." And he said, "Well, how am I going to get them serviced later?" And I said, "Well, I mean, as long as I'm not croaked, you can get them serviced." And he ended up going with a company from Connecticut buying amplifiers, and it was like 6 or 7 of them. And 3 or 4 years later, the amplifiers had failed, and the company was on the brink. And who ended up servicing them? I did.
Funny. Classic.
Doug, what do you think is the biggest mistake first-timers make?
So I think when you're saying mistake, they end up with something they don't like, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're saying by mistake, right? And I think this goes to buying it without really liking it. So maybe not listening enough, taking someone else's advice, but you should be pretty sold on it. Whenever I'm going to buy something, I want to be sold on it. I want to have enough demo when I'm there, rushing into it, whatever. Basically, the biggest mistake is buying without being really sold on it that this is, and that means listening to it when you are buying a stereo system, and it means really liking what you hear, whether that's in the store. It's going to sound different at home, but you have to be sold on it there.
I think the biggest mistake I see people making is being overly attracted to detail and resolution and hearing little teeny things in their favorite recordings they never heard before. And I think it's easy to enjoy that, but maybe that doesn't keep them in good stead over the longer term time frame, where I think people should really focus more on listening enjoyment and emotional engagement to the music they love, not necessarily the very easy to focus on detail, crispness, and hearing things you never heard before. Danny, how much should a beginner worry about the room before buying equipment?
Actually, one more comment on the question before. Even though it would sound, to use a long, large word, no, I'm just kidding. Even though it would sound reasonable, don't pay attention to reviewers. No disrespect, Doug.
I agree.
Don't listen to reviewers. They've got ulterior motives. They're all over the place. Listen for yourself. Anyway, how much?
Yeah, 100%. No, I don't disagree with you.
I know you wouldn't. I knew you wouldn't. How much should they take the room into account? 100%, absolutely, all of it, without a question. In fact, to use a recent example, a friend of mine here locally in Maine, that I met about 1.5 years ago. We've become great friends, hanging out, listening to music together and stuff. He's a newbie and he wants to get into the audiophile game. And he lives in a beautiful old building in a loft. And the room he needs treatment. And so, the very first thing that I told him is like, look, man, we're going to have to spend some coin and some time developing a room treatment plan before you can even get speakers in the room. Right. Because again, what's the point of spending $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on a pair of speakers and putting them in a room, and you as the seasoned mentor to that mentee knows for a fact that that's going to sound like crap. Look no further on Instagram or obviously YouTube, TikTok. In my feed, posts pop up all the time of elaborate systems in rooms, and I'm like, look, I don't even have to set foot in this room. I know this is not going to sound great. It's just not. It's not an Hermes bag that you can plunk $50K cash onto and then just put it on your wife's elbow and prance around with it and think that's it. It really is going to have a detrimental impact to the sound quality if your room is not properly treated or properly acoustically set up to handle a speaker of any kind.
Mike.
Rant over. Rant.
Well, I have a little different take on that. And I think the first thing, it depends on whether we're talking about a beginner or not. Okay. So if you're beyond a beginner, it's kind of a different situation. But if you're a beginner, to me, the biggest thing is what's going to let you listen. So if you have a house and you got a partner or wife or whatever, and where are you going to be able to actually listen? And how do you want to listen? What's your lifestyle? So I think finding a room, a space for your own where you can actually listen is even more important than a great room if you're not going to really be able to listen. So that you got to work through that part first. Kind of availability is more important than talent in a sense, is my point. Beyond that, for sure, you need to understand your speakers in your room, and certain speakers are way easier to deal with marginal rooms and that sort of thing. So maybe you gravitate toward a speaker that's not as room dependent, and that all of a sudden makes your room, or you go with a two-way instead of something that's got a big bottom end, because that's going to work better in your room. So that's kind of stage 2. Stage 1 is, how can I listen?
Doug.
2 things. So sorry, a bit of a cough. I wouldn't get somebody not to buy a stereo because they have a bad room. If you want to listen, you want to listen, and you get a good system, and you're going to have to live with certain compromises. However, the room should very much take into consideration, it comes back to what Peter said, the size of the speaker and the room. Many people do not consider that. And we've had reviewers in the past, I would say, don't buy those speakers. I know you think the most expensive one in the line is the best because it's the most expensive. You got way too small a room, and they buy it and it sounds bad. And then they go, oh, I should have listened because, more is better and then stuff like that. So the room, go with what you have. Yes, you got to be able to listen to it. Might be compromised. Don't let that stop you from buying a stereo, but then appropriately size your system for the room. Don't have a little system in a giant room. I have a giant room behind me up here, and I wouldn't put a couple two-ways up here because they wouldn't be able to charge up the room enough. Down in my living room, that's a different story.
But here's an interesting anecdote, right? Here's an interesting thing to point out. So, for example, up here in as I call it, Studio A, which is 15 by 30, I've got my Wilson Alexia Vs, right? Downstairs in Studio B, I've got a pair of DeVore 096s. The room downstairs is, 30 by 40, somewhere around there, 30 by 45. Those speakers are perfectly capable of powering that room and creating room-filling sound with ease. So, again, yes, completely agree with you, Doug, 100%. But I also want to caution people that, look, you have to put the damn speaker into the room to be able to evaluate what it's going to sound like.
I agree with that.
Peter.
We were talking about the room.
Yes, how much should a beginner worry about the room before buying equipment?
Well, I mean, when you're a beginner, the room is probably not your first consideration. You will put it in your living room. You will put it in a spare bedroom, whatever. If you put it in your living room, you're going to have to make sure that your wife or whoever lets you play it when you want to play it. and many times they don't. So that's when you get moved to a separate sound room, and then your system can evolve. I mean, that's typically what happens with my customers. They start with a smaller system, and then the system evolves, and the room gets better, the system gets better. So as far as the beginner paying attention to the room, he should, but it will never be his first consideration.
I agree that sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's not realistic to expect the beginner to be able to navigate the room very well. That's why they're beginner.
Which brings back the whole mentor thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, if they know enough to find a mentor.
Very true. You don't know what you don't know until someone tells you otherwise.
Yeah,
you don't know what
you don't know. That's where the hi-fi groups and clubs could be a good idea.
Sure.
And most of the hi-fi clubs, I've done many presentations at the hi-fi clubs, and it's mostly elderly men that are a member of these groups, and it would be nice to get some new people coming in.
Yeah. By the way,
you could learn a lot from those people that have been in it for a very long time.
Absolutely.
Can I just say a theme came up for a future episode, Ron? My wife used this living room system. It's a big system all the time. The key is, it isn't like she loves it. The key is make it usable. And how do you make hi-fi usable? And that's a problem with many of these systems. These guys have these unusable systems. Make the system usable. And everybody.
Ron, real quick, Patrick made a comment. Beginner usually means limited appetite for expense. Highlight that for a second, if you don't mind. You're absolutely right, Patrick. And you know what? Shame on the industry for not having taken that into account and into consideration, and sort of keeping the speaker part separate from all of the room treatment. And you're absolutely right. The room treatment factor is a complete afterthought. Hey, look, many times you're lucky in life and you end up with a room that, if you populate it with enough furniture, with enough carpeting, art on the wall, this, that, and the other, it's going to sound pretty decent, right? I was certainly lucky. I mean, Ron visited me when we used to live in LA many times, and I had absolutely zero room treatment in our living room. And the system sounded fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. World class, I would say, right? When I moved here, specifically into Studio A and built this out, I literally, when it was all said and done, the final coat of paint was struck, I literally nearly fainted because the room sounded absolutely dreadful, like horse poop. I mean, seriously. And I stood in here and I'm like, good Lord, what did I blow all this money on? They're never going to be able to fix this. Well, fortunately, the Vicoustic team stepped in, and shout out to the engineers at Vicoustic and their proprietary room software and all the stuff that they use. Because, the guy, I sent him the first measurements and he kind of laughed and chuckled when I said, oh my God, I really don't know that you guys can fix this. Guess what? They fixed it. Not only did they fix it, it sounds freaking amazing. So, but again, for a novice, complete afterthought. So anyway.
I do want to say that the magazines, I think, can be very interesting, entertaining reads. And I think magazine reviews, whether it's online magazine or print magazine, it's a great way for people to learn about components they might not have heard about before. It might, if it's a reviewer who is consonant with your personal preferences, it might give you an idea. Oh, you know what? I think I should check that out after all. So I think the magazines and online and print have a wonderful purpose. And I think they do help even beginners to at least alert people to components of which they might not have otherwise been aware. Question 7.
Don't take them as gospel. And this is coming from a reviewer. Don't take it as gospel. Take it as information to feed in with everything else. And this is coming from a guy who runs magazines.
Fair enough. That sounds right to me. Question 7. As you think about the evolution of your personal stereo, did you ever make a wholesale change of topology of components? Did you ever go from a all tube system to an all solid state system, mostly solid state to mostly tube? Did you ever change completely the topology of the speaker, going from a horn speaker to a box or a planar to a box? Doug.
Not really, but I will say when I was younger before, because I've been doing this now since 1980. When I was younger and you don't know much technically and stuff, you tend to get bamboozled by a lot of stuff. So you start seeing this, and all this magic is going to come in. So that did happen a little bit, though I didn't make a wholesale change. But I tried tubes, I tried panels, I tried all that type of stuff. And as I learned more and more, the fluctuations became less violent, and I just started, okay, this is the kind of component I want, this is the limitations of that kind of component, and that. So on a learning curve, but I wouldn't say a wholesale change. I didn't go from, oh, I need this to, oh, I need that, but little evolutions in the gear along the way.
Peter, how about yourself, your personal system at home?
Well, I typically have two systems in my room. With one set of speakers, I have my own electronics, solid state, MOSFET, JFET, and then I have an add-on to that. I have a tube system so that I can demonstrate my speakers with both solid state and tube. And the way I do that is, typically I have all the front end components on either my left or my right side, depending on the room. And on the front wall, I have speakers and then amplifiers on the floor and tube amps and solid state amps and several of each. And so if you want to listen to the tube system, you just flop the speaker leads on the amplifiers, and then the rest of the chain is ready to go. So personally, I have mostly always had dynamic loudspeakers. In the later years, probably about 10 years or so ago, I went more from the typical HiFi driver setup, scan, speak, VFA, CRs, and all that. And I went to more pro style drivers. So I use a lot of drivers from the company in Northridge, California. And I get some of their older drivers. I buy them out from touring companies, and I completely refurbish them into as new drivers. And like, for an example, I saw a guy comment on our M2.5 speaker system. I probably sold 100 pairs of those in the last 10 years or so. And so I have gone more from hi-fi into pro drivers being used for hi-fi. And the ones of you that have heard my systems at shows, they can be pretty spectacular, even in big rooms.
And I would guess you went along that route because you found that the pro side, because I have found many designers doing this, the drivers are higher output. They tend to create a more lifelike presentation. They tend not to be limited like many of the hi-fi drivers, right? Hi-fi drivers often seem like toys in comparison to some of these drivers.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I deal with drivers with 4-inch voice coils and, 15-inch and 18-inch domes. In our biggest system, we have 12 18-inch drivers, 2 12-inch drivers, and a 6-inch ribbon. And that will pressurize almost any room.
And that is kind of why you made the change, because you're not the first designer I've encountered.
Well, no, I mean, it's just like, it just sounded more real. Mm-hmm. Like you get something and say, hey, I'm going to try this. And then you try it and it's like, holy crap, this sounds real. Mm. And as I said, I use a lot of drivers from the Northridge company. And
you can say the company.
No, I can't.
JBL.
Yeah, we will. JBL.
No, I can't.
We just
some Lansing guy and some other B guy and some other J guy.
But that is kind of like, so I have both tube and solid state. I play probably 95% vinyl and 5% digital.
Mike.
Well, in 2001, I'd had solid state and low efficiency dynamic speakers for 7 years. And I kind of got bored with it. And I switched to OTL tubes and a much more efficient, much more more coherent speaker system. So, and that reference from that time is kind of still my reference. So so I had 7 years with let's say the dark side, or however you want to describe it, and then I changed. So so that was then. That was my time to do that.
So what prompted you later to switch to almost entirely solid state with the Dart Seal components?
Well, without getting too deep into it, I felt like the Dart Seal was very near the tenor audio OTLs, which I loved, and the Dart Seal didn't blow up like the tenors did. But I continued to enjoy the Karma speaker and the drivers that they used in subsequent speakers that I owned. So, but that tenor audio reference I identified the Dart Seal as having much of that and many more things, and maybe just a little bit less of some other things. So I felt like the Dart Seal took me forward, and I flirted with tubes in the last 20 years with Dart Seal, but until recently didn't go away. So I've never lost my love. I consider myself a tube guy that loves that owns solid state that resembles tubes. So that's that. If that answers the question.
Danny, in the audio laboratory in Long Beach, you had 2 flagship dynamic driver systems. You had contemporary turntables, vintage turntables, tubes, and solid state. So I don't know how you're going to answer this question, but let's hear it.
I had it all. Gosh, I mean, look, when I first started out with this back when I was in my teens, I had absolutely no money to buy any of this stuff, right? And so it was really just, listening, going to stores and telling people up front. I was always very upfront. I was like, hey man, look, I have no money for any of this. I just want to play some music. Do you mind? And 9 times out of 10 people would let me, right? And I'm talking about, this is, across the pond, in good old Europe, as well as here in the States. When I moved here permanently, in the late 90s and early 2000s. And, when I started writing for Positive Feedback back in 2000, which is hard to believe, it's now 26 years ago. I was a young punk. I'm still a young punk. I was a little younger back then. I tried everything. I mean, I'm trying to remember. In fact, I think the very first setup that I actually purchased, Kaey Audio. It was one of their preamps and amps. It was all tube based, because I was like, oh man, this tube stuff is so cool. The glowing tubes at night. My wife at the time was, she was into it. It was like, oh, all the glowing tubes, et cetera, et cetera. And, it was just, it had a certain melody to it, right? Again, I was very green. I was still learning, and my next system was EAR, Tim DiParmincini. And then I went from that back to solid state. I think it was Brinkman that I got into. And then I got into Einstein from Germany, and that was all OTL based, tube based, obviously, with a tube preamp. Interestingly enough, they stayed with solid state on the phono side, but they're very much an all analog company. They did have a CD player at the time, and and throughout the years, I would get obviously all kinds of equipment in for review from whatever you name it, I had it. And the Einstein stuff just simply stuck to me in the sense that it was always very wide bandwidth, very dynamic, very untube-like, or generally speaking, all the characteristics that you would normally attribute tube sound to. The Einstein had none of it. So it was very wide bandwidth, open, dynamic, punchy. And then really, throughout all that time, keeping a friendship with Ed Meitner, and starting out with his EQ1 DS Audio EQ1 back in 2020 or 2021, and then getting into the rest of his stuff. It was the first time that I felt like, again, shameless self-promotion, I get it, but still, it was the first time that I felt like here's solid state that expands upon the Einstein sound with more power, even more bandwidth and dynamics, but retains that musicality factor. So I suppose Ron, to your point, you've been to my place. I mean, you've heard it all, what I've had and used to have. Obviously, you haven't visited me yet, but all I can say is audio is a journey, and you're on that journey. And I would encourage you to find something that you like, stick with it. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. I've bought and sold so much stuff over the years that I thought was like, oh man, this is the holy grail. This is it. Only 6 months later, I think Mike even brought that up. 6 months later, it was gone. So yeah, I mean, just do your due diligence. And, if there's one advice I have is, gosh, spend money on music, right? I mean, I've got 10,000 records. I've got about probably, 2,000 CDs. Obviously my listening is heavily skewed towards records, but buy music. I mean, this is really what this is all about, right? Buy music, listen to music, and, let the chips fall where the chips fall.
Quick question. With all of your experience with so many different types of components, did you ever venture into either horn loudspeakers or dipole planers, or you've always had dynamic driver boxes?
That is a very thoughtful question, Ron. I have listened to all kinds of speaker systems. I have never owned anything other than dynamic driver-based loudspeakers.
Question number 8. How does an audiophile determine whether a system is revealing and highly resolving and detailed, which all sounds good, or overly bright, edgy, and analytical? Peter.
You listen to it. You hear that almost instantly. I would agree that comment that was made earlier that if a system is like overly detailed, it's easy to get attached to for a little while, but you disengage with that system pretty quickly. You will know when it sounds real, and that's when everything kind of starts gelling together. So overly bright, you pick that up, especially if you're trained. It was commented on earlier also that you have to be a trained listener, and that's definitely true. Some of my best customers are professional musicians, like in a classical genre, a violinist from Los Angeles and a conductor of classical orchestras, and have made many recordings for Wilson Audio and stuff like that. Lowell Graham out of El Paso, Texas, and violinist is Peter Kent out of Los Angeles, plays in Sony studios and stuff like that. And the ears they have is just incredible. They can hear anything instantly, and they can describe what they hear. And those are very nice customers to have because they can guide you in the right direction.
Doug.
I think one of the things that can happen to many reviewers and whatnot is they can confuse what they think is detail or an analytical sound with something else. And this is something I learned over time. There was a British company, I won't name them, but I know the designers well, and they were using ribbon tweeters for a long time. Now, I don't know if Peter's ever experienced this, but ribbon tweeters have a big distortion problem, usually below 3 kilohertz. Put them in a two-way speaker, and you'll get a lot of distortion. Now, you might not identify it as distortion. It can sound hard. It can sound this and that. And people will go, oh, that's just revealing the recording. That's just you're hearing more in. When the first time, and I'll name the name, YG Acoustic sent me their ANAT monitor. And I'm like, man, that's one hard sounding speaker. Oh no, you're hearing a flat frequency response and stuff like that. When we eventually measured it, it had like 5% distortion across the band or something, right? And so what you sometimes mistake as revealing, I hear this hard sound, can actually be distortion from somewhere in the chain, or it can be an overly bright tweeter. You know, let's pump up the tweeter and I'm hearing more detail. Are you? You're just pumping up the highs. And so I think it's sussing out what overly detailed is. And what I think is important is it's really hard because if you don't make the recordings, you're not going to really know what the sound is. But if you have a set number of recordings, and I have about 10, that I've listened to on so many systems that you know what they sound like.
Right.
And you go, you know what, that must be exactly the way that sounds. That sounds very natural, and when other systems start pumping up this or missing out that or that, you realize there's imbalances. So I think it's sussing out what is really detail and analytical versus a tipped up tweeter or distortion in the midband or something like that, making a hard sound. And then just knowing your recordings really well. I don't know if that made any sense. But I think sometimes the detail and analytical part gets a little bit confused.
Danny.
I apologize. I've been engaging with the audience on the comments section. What was the question?
How do you tell if something is highly resolving and detailed, or edgy and bright?
Edgy and bright versus high resolving. How do you tell the difference? Gosh. I mean, again, just listening to stuff, I think, right? I mean, trying out different combinations, one of the things that I just randomly, since I'm so much into vinyl, whenever someone tells me or I see a post or something, oh gosh, this record sounds like it's entirely too bright or not bright enough. I'm like, okay, is your vinyl setup properly set up in first place? Right. Are all the parameters of the cartridge just exactly dialed in? Because if they're not, it's completely going to throw off everything you're hearing. And yes, it could go from super bright to super dull and everything in between, right? Oh, I'm only hearing the left channel. I'm only hearing the right channel. So, yeah, absolutely. The other thing that frankly, I mean, again, I think when Doug was on the first time around a couple of months ago, I had brought this up. In this day and age, I think one of the fundamentals should also be check your hearing, right? Apple with their latest software on their phones and their AirPods have made it so easy to do a medical grade check on your ears. It takes 5 to 10 minutes. You'll get a complete snapshot of what you can actually hear, what your ears are actually capable of hearing, I should say. Do that test, right? I've challenged people in the industry to post their tests. I mean, I've posted mine. If you look at some of my past videos when I actually review stuff, I always post it with my audiogram that you can see. Gosh, look, we're always assuming everybody can hear equally, and that's really not true, right? As you get older, for men especially, definitively, as proven by biology and science, your hearing degrades dramatically, particularly in the high frequencies. So get an audiogram, get a hearing test. It may not be your front end. It may be your ears.
Mike, how do you distinguish highly resolving from aggressive sounding?
Well, there's blatant aggressive sounding, so it's degrees, so if you have reasonable references, something that's really off should jump out at you. I mean, if we're not talking beginners now, experienced audiophile with lots of references, that shouldn't be an issue. But if it's subtle, I think you need to be in touch with how the music's making you feel. And then if you're not connecting, now that should that should spur you should be checking, are your shoulders relaxed? Are you feeling good? Do you want to listen more? Do you want to listen less? So being in touch with how the music's affecting you, and then that would say, hey, because I've had that go on and found a grounding thing disconnected, or this problem where there's something changed, but the only way I could tell would be, it wasn't something that hit me in the face. It was just something that I could tell I wasn't connecting in the same level. So being sensitive to your own self, how you feel when things are great, and where the music's taking you. And of course that can be media, it can be gear, it can be, I guess, electrical system. It can be all kinds of things. But so if it's not quite flowing and engaging and immersive, that would be my for the more subtle issues. So
one little test I use is raising the volume in the system. So you're listening, and then you raise the volume. If merely raising the volume makes you wince or cringe a little bit, that suggests to me that it might be the edgy brightness side and not simply desirable resolution.
That can
Question
be very
9.
recording dependent too.
Sorry.
I said that can be very recording dependent too.
That was, by the way, a very good point, Mike. Like how you feel when you listen to the music. That's a very good point.
And that's everything. I mean,
Yeah.
really, that's why we do it.
Question 9. Should an audiophile focus on every aspect of the system equally? If the electrical system seems fine, is there any reason to focus on power conditioners and grounding boxes? Doug.
You got 2 questions there. There's one thing that's bugged me for years when on focusing on every part of the system equally. There's this myth in audio that everything matters. No, everything doesn't matter, okay? And not everything matters equally. We've kind of all agreed that loudspeakers make the biggest difference, transducers make the biggest difference, your turntable and stuff like that. So no, not everything should be focused on equally, and your interaction with the room is a huge aspect. So unequally through the system. Now, what was the other part of the question? Oh yeah, electrical. This is another problem I have with reviewers. They always want to review power stuff and they never look at their electrical system. Now, I used to live in a 22 floor building, and I was on the top floor. It was brownout central, where I couldn't even maintain voltage. I had a voltmeter on my power for my stereo system. So I had a power regenerator and it really worked. When I moved into my house, which I have dedicated lines, everything's grounded correctly, all of that, my power's perfect. I have nothing on my lines. And reviewers in particular want to get some power conditioner in, say, oh, blacker backgrounds, more dynamic contrast and stuff like, did you even need it in the first place? If I had a grounding problem, first thing I would do is call the electrician and say, can you check the grounding throughout my electrical thing? Can you put in some dedicated wires? Can we make sure everything's correct? Now, in a 22 floor apartment building, I couldn't do that. So I had to resort to a regenerator. So fix a problem only if you have a problem and get the problem looked at. And, electricity is pretty well understood.
Danny.
Right.
You don't agree with that?
No, completely. I completely agree. No, I absolutely do. I mean, look, the thing with electricity and all that stuff is, when I look back at our house in Long Beach, it still had the original electrical system in it, and the system sounded fantastic. Ron can attest to it, as well as many others that came, right?
Your room is just amazing. That room is just a naturally great sounding room, that whole living room.
You get lucky every now and then, right?
And let me guess, good components with good power supplies and all that, right?
Exactly. Yes. And again, when I start talking to people that are newbies and or more advanced, I'm like, look, fundamentally, any component, be it a DAC, a preamp, an amp, whatever it may be, the basic fundamentals of any of these components is a power supply. If in 2026 you are unable to create a product with a power supply that is capable of delivering clean, reasonably clean power to your component, or to your electronics inside your component, you're doing something wrong. I mean, it's all I can tell you, right?
I do not agree. All the crap that is on the power lines nowadays is unbelievable.
I know. Look, I know. There's a lot of crap on the power lines.
Light dimmers, all that crap. You have no idea what we're fighting with.
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
You can fix all that, but when you fix all that, you limit the power that goes into your power supply. And you can have the best power supply in the world, and your daughter uses a hairdryer and your amplifier hums. It's supposed to be your problem and not the hairdryer's problem.
All I can tell you is I have absolutely zero hum in any of my two systems.
I think it depends on your system, right? And where you are.
Of course it does. Oh, of course it does. Yeah. A well-designed system is going to take all that into account. So
no, I mean, also your electrical in your home is probably good, and maybe is not susceptible to problems others might have.
I mean, I'll give you that. Probably true, right? We're out here in Maine. We're in the middle of nowhere. I've got 2 dedicated AC lines coming into Studio A. I have no power conditioning whatsoever running in my system. I don't even have any power conditioning running into Studio B, which doesn't have any dedicated AC lines. And I still have no hum on my phono. I have and Studio B is all tube based. It's the Einstein system. I have absolutely zero hum upstairs. So again, yes. Have I heard systems that have all those issues? Absolutely. Are they all the flaws of the electrical system coming into it? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know that the US in general has a very poor electrical power supply in general, very generally speaking. I think Europeans are much more advanced when it comes to that. And having, a stable voltage line. I mean, I remember way back in our first house, I think I measured our voltage at one point at like 104 volts, and it was supposed to be 120. So insane power fluctuations. So yeah, I mean, take it for what it is.
Mike, does an audiophile have to obsess over every aspect of the system?
Well, there's 2 ways to look at that. First of all, I think that not particularly, but as far as talking about power conditioners and especially separate boxes, I think there's basics in a system, and I think there's cherry on top issues. So I do think that if you start adding a lot of stuff into your system before you figured out the signal path, then you don't really know what you have. So adding power conditioners and those sorts of things can confuse making decisions on how the system should be. Okay. On the other hand, if you're going to be advanced in system development, then as you progress, everything does start to matter. And to go further, then it's all out there because you open a door and there's a wall in front of you, and then you open the window, and then you open the door, and then there's behind it, there's another one. So you can keep peeling the onion. So both are true in that, it depends on how far you've gone down the road in system development. And it isn't necessarily, but I think that if you're adding grounding boxes, or you're doing this or you're doing that, is it confusing decision-making on what's doing what? And so, because those things have color a lot of times. So that's the thing. If you're needing that to fix a problem, do you really know what the real problem is? And our member Rex, and then there's an Ed who have the company that does the power, the basic power repairs on your home power grid. I mean, that's where you start. You got to make sure that's right. And if you're in a building where you do have restrictions on what you can do, then, you just got to do the best you can. So anyway.
Question number 10. Should the different sonic attributes of components be used to offset each other? For example, if you feel you have a slightly fatiguing tweeter, should you offset that with a smooth, warm-sounding line stage or amplifier? Peter.
That's one way of looking at it. Yeah, you could do that, certainly. That's system matching. And that's where, again, like listen to somebody that knows how to put a system together. So certainly, yeah, you can do that. Just to return to the prior question, should you concentrate on everything in a system equally? No, you shouldn't. You should concentrate mostly on speakers in the room, then on your front end, then on your preamp, then on your power amp, and on all the power that feeds it. If you make an amplifier that can deliver maximum power, you want as clear a connection to the power source as possible. And then you connect that amplifier to all the crap that's on the line. So if you have a 4 kVA transformer, if it gets excited, it'll make mechanical hum. Not necessarily, it won't make hum in the speaker because you have a good designed power supply. But what the transformer sees is all the crap that's on the power lines. I run all my systems on fully balanced power, which eliminates all of these issues. And typically, most of my very high-end customers, we install balanced power transformers. Not
do you
as much.
Equitech? Do you use Equitech, Peter?
No, I my transformer company in Canada makes my transformers for me.
Okay.
So, like in my own system, I have a balanced power transformer for my amplifiers, and I have a balanced power transformers that feeds my entire front end.
Doug, should we mix and match contrasting components with different sonic attributes to get what you want?
I think unless you've got state-of-the-art measurement gear and understanding of what you're seeing, if you've got a brake tweeter, just get a new set of speakers. It means you got a brake tweeter. Going back to the amplifier driving the speaker, that's what the speaker probably sounds like, yes. Unless the amplifier can't deliver any bass, frequencies and stuff. So get a new pair of speakers instead of trying to mix and match. You want general neutrality, though with speakers, it's hard to get something that's 100% neutral. Get something that sounds good at the speaker end and get all the components feeding it.
Danny.
Yep. I completely agree with what Doug said. Again, at the end of the day, universally accepted, the speakers couple the sound to your room, period. And if your speaker does one thing, I think you can influence it to an extent with the amplifier and or preamp or DAC or whatever it is you're running as your source or intermediary. But fundamentally, I don't think you can influence it to the point where you can make something, you can make a chicken into a turkey. It's not going to work, right? So, completely agree with what Doug said. Get a new speaker. Again, goes back to my original point. Find a mentor, find multiple mentors. Listen to as many possible speakers as you can, right? Listen to them in your own house. Ask the dealer, hey, I'll leave you a deposit. Can you set these up for me, right? Because I can guarantee you what you hear in one place is not going to be what's going to be replicated in your own four walls.
Now, we should say, though, before you maybe get the speaker, do play with placement and also
absolutely.
Absorption.
For sure.
That could tame everything down. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's like vinyl setup, right? My vinyl sounds like shit. Well, let's take a look and see. Well, of course it sounds like shit. It's not set up properly. Absolutely.
I know Mike feels strongly about this question.
Yeah, well, I mean, every time you balance, you lose information, or you add some sort of coloration sameness. So there's a price to pay for every time that you use a component to balance out some other distortion somewhere else, because that's what it is. So you're just adding more distortions, and you're farther away from, let's just say, the absolute sound or whatever term you want to use. So yeah, now like Peter says, unless you measure things, or I'm sorry, Doug, unless you measure things, what's neutral? But in theory, you can understand what's neutral in your experience, and then you got to stay there. You got to stay with it, and coloration, there's a price for it. You may like it, but it's not a good path to go down. But some people do.
I totally agree. I don't believe in the Band-Aid concept of trying to put your thumb on the scale of all the other components to correct a sonic problem with one particular component. Music segment, Danny.
Can I add one thing, Bob?
Oh, of course. Go ahead.
While Peter's here?
Yep.
I will say, Peter, I like the track you're on, and this is where I've kind of had a shift in thinking. This big driver pro thing, it's hard to measure, but there's an effortless in the sound of these speakers. And I've got a pair of speakers here, not the same, but they come from Arundel. They got this stack of 4 woofers, big woofers, wave-guided tweeter and all that, and there's an effortlessness to the sound that traditional speakers, and many designers have gone with these narrow speakers and small drivers and that sort of thing, and they're like working. I like that direction you're on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I want to say one thing about that. I put it slightly differently. I talk about it in terms of driver surface area, regardless of the topology of speaker. To my ears, there is something good about lots of driver surface area in terms of naturalness, believability, and effortlessness.
I'll add one other thing. If you have a reasonably efficient speaker, and so the speaker's relaxed and the amplifier's relaxed, as opposed to a very hard to drive speaker, I think there's some magic there too, along with the driver. So it's not just one or the other, but I think it's the amplifier being right for the speaker is critical in that too.
True. Just to add to that, an 8-inch woofer, it takes 4 of those to make up for a 15-inch woofer in surface area.
Right. No replacement.
It takes almost 2 15s to make up for an 18.
See if you'll agree with this analogy an electrostatic designer gave me. He said, imagine a swimming pool and you've got a concrete block, right? And you're moving the water with it. It takes a lot of strength to hold that block and get it moving. But now take a really light surf, like board, like a foam board. You can really move it quickly, a big one, right? And get a lot of wave. And that large surface area seems to couple with the room nicer. Would you agree with that, Peter?
Yes.
And move it more easily.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, it's more linear too. More linear.
Yeah.
More linear.
So there is something, and so I'm glad to see you're on that path.
Well, thank you.
With the company you won't name.
Danny, our music segment.
Music segment. So you know what? Since Doug is on this show, you can't go without mentioning a great Canadian singer-songwriter, and the name is Coulter Wall.
Jeez, I don't even know that one. Somebody was pointing out my April Wine album here in the comments, but I don't know Coulter Wall.
Oh man,
4 LPs. Yeah, he's great.
Fantastic.
Where's this guy from?
Good question.
I'll have to look that up.
Where the hell is he from? I want to
probably Saskatoon or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been to Saskatoon a lot. Don't make fun of Saskatoon.
No, my grandparents are from there.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Very much old school country. What I call the old Johnny Cash style country.
Yeah.
Beautiful arrangements.
Country blues.
Yeah. Fantastic. His baritone voice. Holy shit. Like seriously, man, talk about tuning a system to a male vocalist. Oh my gosh, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think this is his second album. He's probably got about half dozen out, Mike, I think.
I've got
like
4.
that.
A buddy of mine turned me onto him, and I love cowboy blues, so he's great.
Completely agree.
Jamie Johnson, he's kind of like Jamie Johnson a little bit.
Watch the next Expona show get clobbered with Coulter Wall.
Coulter Wall. Okay. Got to look that up.
Yeah. Then we have Walt Dickerson, vibraphonist, played with Andrew Hill, Sun Ra, many others. This is probably his most famous album.
Is that a mono?
To My Queen. What's that?
Is that a mono?
No, this is a stereo.
Oh, stereo. Okay.
Stereophonic. Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful arrangements. Very mellow jazz, easy to get into. If you're new to jazz, if you're exploring jazz, can't recommend this highly enough. Walt Dickerson. He's got many other great albums, but this is definitely one of his standout albums. Absolutely gorgeous. This is just a standard reissue. Originals are impossible to come by. ERC, the Electric Recording Company, did a reissue of his mono record for 900 smackers back in the day. This is I think $23 on eBay. Absolutely fantastic. Or of course you can stream it. Keeping in with the sort of classic theme, Chet Baker. This is a great Philip Catherine, Chet Baker and Philip Catherine album on Music on Vinyl. Classic Chet Baker and fabulous guitar sound. The album's called There'll Never Be Another You. I think he was talking about you, Doug. Great reissue. Very hard to find an original. This Music on Vinyl is absolutely fantastic. Easy to get. Look at it on eBay or Discogs. Again, classic Chet Baker. And then one of the records that I came across it, I don't know, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. A friend of mine recommended it to me. So it's the great James George Hunter, otherwise known as Jimmy Rolls, with Stan Getz. So this record, this particular one, happens to be a what do you call it? A DJ copy, a promo copy. Easy to find, $10-15, no more than that. Absolutely phenomenal jazz. And Jimmy Rolls, his voice. There's a couple of tracks where he sings. Let me tell you something. You want to set up your hi-fi. It's kind of like the Coulter Wall stuff. You want to set up your hi-fi. You listen to this guy sing. And man, if it doesn't click, something's wrong with your system. Move the speakers around, like Doug used to say. Change the speakers from the far side to the near side of the wall. When it clicks, you're going to hear it and you're going to be like, holy shit. So anyway, super cheap record, easy to find, and just absolutely phenomenal sound. And of course, the great Stan Getz and Jimmy Rolls. And that's it for the. And
I looked up while you're doing that. Coulter Wall is from Swift Current, Saskatchewan, our least populated province, just north of North Dakota and Montana. There, maybe an hour north. Probably
I'm not surprised.
I grew up in Saskatchewan. For anybody watching in Moose Jaw and Regina.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I'll look up that Coulter Wall. That's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
I like
any other music recommendations?
I have a few.
Go right ahead.
Love it.
So
yes, go Peter, man. You're my hero.
I came across a YouTube video with a guy describing in great detail how a studio recording is done, and he was talking about this album, 10cc, the original soundtrack.
That's
I got it. Fantastic recording.
Was it
And
the
of course-
video? Is I'm not in love in there? Is
Yeah. Yeah, that's the
yeah.
one he's
There's a great
describing.
YouTube
about
video
Cry?
about nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Is Cry
album.
in
I
that
can
one?
highly
Cry?
recommend it. And then the follow-up to it is this one right here.
Oh,
NCC,
yes.
How dare you?
Of course.
Also highly recommended.
Oh, very
So
good.
those would be
very
my two
good.
recommendations. Recording on both of these are fantastic, and it's $20 Amazon albums.
Awesome. 10cc is good stuff. No,
Yeah, and
no
that's
doubt
a
about
great,
it.
it's a great, fascinating thing on how I'm Not in Love was made, because it's not how you think it might be made.
Oh,
A
not
lot
at
of
all. You should
video
really look up
manipulation
that
in there.
video. I forgot the gentleman's
It's
name.
kind of an accident. It was kind of an accident.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually, the lady that comes in and say, "Big boys don't cry, big boys don't
Right.
cry." That's a cleaning lady in the
Right,
the
right.
studio.
Yep.
I know, that's great stuff. No, I encourage people to look up that video. It was actually Lasse Danielson at Electric Company who put me onto that video, because he's really into the trivia of how a lot of those classic records got made. Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
This was a
Well,
great
this
show.
A great venue. Thank you for inviting me.
And
My
I think
pleasure.
it's good to have the information for people type thing. Trust some reviewers, just not all.
Very true. Don't trust me.
Only trust me sometimes. I don't know.
Thanks for joining the show, guys. Really nice show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for
Thanks,
watching.
Ron. It's a good format.
Appreciate it. See you
Bye.
next week. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.